Welcome, everyone, to this exciting Cybersecurity Awareness Month activity. While our focus here at UMUC is cybersecurity all year round, this special month gives us the opportunity to offer a special event, such as this one, with the theme of connections, linking academics, skills, and professional experience. My name is Lois Palin, and I am a collegiate professor for the Cybersecurity Department in the graduate school. I teach management and policy. The official name of our department is the Cybersecurity and Information Assurance Department, and we have collaborated with many people, especially the Center for Security Studies and the other very supportive organizations within the UMUC family who have made this possible. You know, we kind of talked at lunch today a little bit about TV shows. And I don't get a lot of time to look at television, but as a cybersecurity professional, I feel it's my obligation to kind of binge watch CSI Cyber. Anybody watch that? I don't particularly like the show, but I think we all know that television kind of brings some sexiness to some careers, and I think that show is doing that. But I also think what we're doing today is very important because what we are doing here, collaborating with others, having important people speak to us about cybersecurity, is really very important to someone who might be looking for a cool career in cyber. We have a very full program today, so in the interest of time, I'd like to move forward with the program. But there are some important people in the audience that are here to help you, and I think that as a networking opportunity, you should make sure that you get a chance to meet them before leaving here today. You have a list of the UMUC cybersecurity program colleagues in your program, but I'd like to just take a minute to call their names and titles and let you get to see a face with the name. Let me start with Rosemary Schumber. She is the interim vice dean for the Cybersecurity and Information Assurance Department, and program chair for the Digital Forensics and Investigations Program. Rose? Bruce DeGrazia is the graduate program chair for Cybersecurity Management and Policy Program. Can't see with the lights. We have Emma Garrison Alexander, who is the graduate program chair for Cybersecurity Technology Program. We have Balakrishnan Dasarati, who is the graduate program chair for Information Assurance and the upcoming Cyber Operations Program. I don't know if Dr. Bhaskar is in the room, but he is the undergraduate vice dean for the Computing Department. We also have from undergrad Jeff Draputra, who is the undergraduate program chair for cybersecurity programs. We have Jimmy Robinson, who is the undergraduate program chair for computer science and software development and security programs. We also have Dr. Amjad Ali, who is the associate vice president and cybersecurity advisor to the president at UMUC. We also have Mamadou Cham, who is the director of virtual labs. So these are very important people that will be here today and after the presentations and the panel discussion, and we'll be glad to talk to you about careers and academics in cybersecurity. So again, thank you for attending this University of Maryland University College Cyber Connections Linking Academic Skills and Professional Expertise event. Today we're featuring Emery Shulak, who is the Chief Information Security Officer and Senior Privacy Official at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. We'll also have a panel discussion led by UMUC's own Chris Whittleton with 8 beautiful and handsome cybersecurity specialists who have their own perspectives, which will make for a very lively discussion. So the agenda's in your program, and we'll move forward, and it's my pleasure to also introduce Pete Young, who has another warm welcome for you. Pete is the Senior Vice President here at UMUC of Analytics, Planning, and Technology. Pete?
Thanks, Lois, and welcome to everyone as well. like to share my warm welcome to our facility here in Largo. I'd also like to thank our panel of experts for joining us on today's topic. I think, as Lois introduced, cyber connections linking academics, skills, and professional experience. It's critical that in the United States, we focus on developing our cyber workforce to secure our nation's economic interests. The cybersecurity industry is booming, and the demand for professionals in this field continues to rise. A few interesting trends I'd like you to think about. The demand for cybersecurity experts is growing at 3.5 times the pace of the overall IT job market. Network and information security professionals are expected to grow by 53% in the next 4 years. The average cybersecurity professional earns 3 times more than the average worker. And 2 recent reports estimated that there were over 1 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs globally last year, and that's expected to increase to 1.5 million jobs within the next 5 years. Also, the demand for cybersecurity professionals with certifications continues to rise. Last year, there were nearly 50,000 job openings in the U.S. alone requiring a CISSP certification, which is the primary credential for cybersecurity work. That translates to 75% of all persons in the U.S. currently holding that credential. So as you can see, the demand is exploding. UMUC remains committed to helping those close the cybersecurity labor gap and is proud to have graduated thousands of cybersecurity professionals, as well as having thousands more currently enrolled in our programs. At today's event, you'll hear from UMUC's program directors in our many areas of cybersecurity. You'll also have the opportunity to meet with counselors from the Vet Success and Career Services area, speak with a UMUC advisor to learn how you can fast-track your degree with up to 90 transfer credits and get started on your application for admission. Find out which UMUC courses can lead to critical certifications, such as CompTIA Plus, Network Plus, Security Plus, CEH, CISSP, etc. UMUC has earned many awards for academic excellence, including an impressive list of accomplishments for our cybersecurity area. And so I want to put a shout out to Dr. Chaputra. For example, just in the last 4 years, our Cyber Padawans, which is our cybersecurity competition team, has won 10 titles in the last 4 years, including the 2014 Global Cyber Olympics, which was held in Barcelona, Spain, 2013 and 14 Maryland Cyber Challenge, the DC3, and the first ever Cyber DiploHack Cyber Policy Competition. Outside of cybersecurity, our commitment to online and military education has also been recognized. The World Affairs Council honored UMUC with its Educator of the Year Award for 2015, recognizing the university as a leader in innovative education models. Military Times ranked us #1 in its Best for Vets Colleges 2015 annual survey. And Military Advanced Education named UMUC to the 2015 Guide to Military-Friendly Colleges and Universities. So you all know that cybersecurity is something we must all address, and it has a direct impact on our industry as well as all of yours. At this point, I'll leave you with that thought regarding the explosive demand in cybersecurity workforce, the unmet need and challenge that we all face professionally in our jobs and our careers. And hopefully today you'll get some insights from some of these folks as to what is happening in the areas of cybersecurity, defense, policy, and so forth. So hopefully you'll learn something new from our speakers. And again, I thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Pete. I think I have to echo the fact that all of us here at UMUC are very passionate about making sure that we do whatever we can about filling the gap for the need for cybersecurity professionals. Moving on, I am pleased to introduce one of our keynote speakers. His name is Mr. Emory Sulak, and his current position is the Chief Information Security Officer and Senior Privacy Officer at Medicare, Medicaid. Mr. Sulak has over 20 years of experience and has very extensive experience in the information security and IT arenas. And you can imagine that how important his position is at an agency that is entrusted with the health information of over 100 million Americans, me being one, actually. And it has the fundamental responsibility to be stewards of this information to ensure that the confidentiality is protected. Excuse me. Prior to Mr. Shulak being at CMS, he was the deputy CISO for the Department of Homeland Security and supported the development of FISMA, which we are very familiar with. Mr. Shulak has several certifications and has been the two-time Federal 100 Award winner by Federal Computer Week in 2012 and 2014. Mr. Shulak is becoming a friend of UMUC. Just last year around this time, he was here doing a webinar for our cybersecurity students. So we're starting a new committee, Friends of UMUC, and he is the chair. Welcome, please, Emery.
Hi, thanks. I'd like to thank UMUC for inviting me again today. It's been almost a year, actually, since I was here last time. And they asked me really to speak about two things. One is focused around, where are we seeing the biggest threats and challenges in the environment today? And then how does academia really relate to those relationships? I was thinking about it over the last couple of weeks while I was going to a number of seminars and sessions, and I think Kevin Mandia was speaking last week, who is the president of FireEye and the founder of Mandiant. And I think he said it pretty nicely in the fact that what we've seen in the past year is a significant visible approach for nation-state actors trying to get into healthcare and other fields. And what we see is that when you were looking at this sort of attack, this sort of grandiose attack, not so much the script kiddies, not so much the lower-hanging fruit, how many organizations really are prepared to defend themselves against a nation? Regardless of what size an organization you have, is it UMUC, is it some of the organizations that we have up here, do you really have the resources and the technology and the skills necessary to defend yourself against, a nation that really has significantly more resources and capabilities than you? And I think the answer, in most cases, in almost all cases, the answer is probably no. However, what we can do is we can do a good job, we can do a very good job, we can make sure we have qualified people, we can make sure that we do best practices to secure our organization as much as we can. We can, limit the damage that is done if there is an attack, we can recover from an incident if there is one, but really, in reality, there really is no magic bullet to solve all of our problems, but what we do have to do is we have to rely on good people. And I think one of the things that everybody really underappreciates is that when you look at these incidents that have been in the news recently, when you look at the challenges that are facing us and you look at how these things have occurred, you find in so many of the instances, it's not just kind of a piece of bad code. It's not a piece of something that's gone wrong. 9 times out of 10, it's people-oriented. People have made a mistake somewhere. And I think that's an important thing to remember in terms of, are we doing the best we can to protect our environments? Are you qualified? Are you educated? Do you know what you're needing to do? And I think everybody really underappreciates how valuable every single person is to the security stance and position of an organization. It doesn't matter if you are an administrative assistant. It does not matter if you are the network administrator. You have equal rights and equal responsibility to making sure that you've secured that environment. And I think, looking at some of the programs that UMUC has, looking at other programs that you have, people really don't appreciate that. Those 9 out of 10 times that I'm having to solve or work on an issue really relate to a failure of a process or people following a process going forward. So I think what you need to think about doing this, and I made a cheat sheet of a couple of ideas for me. I think one of the things that you see from the Verizon report from 2015 and other news sources, about 90 to 95% of these big attacks involve phishing attacks at some point in those organizations. Everybody has a responsibility for phishing attacks. This summer we began weekly phishing exercises for my own organizations to see how we can do. We've had a drop of 95% in the number of people falling for phishing attacks as a result of routine testing and education as part of a program to make sure everybody's there. But I think it really is important, and what we hear over and over again, even from that phishing exercise that we've done, is that, how it changes people's attitudes. It changes your attitude. It changes your relationship with your kids. Are you sending, malicious emails? Are you accepting? Are you clicking on things? Are you telling your kids not to do? Are they becoming aware? Are they becoming a little paranoid in terms of what they're opening? I think everybody plays a part in different aspects of the organization and in terms of improving their security stance, and phishing is one that everybody can really participate in. But I think when you look at the other fields in cybersecurity and other things you do, I think what you're really doing when you get that education is really learning the best practices. Phishing is one that everybody can participate in, but then there are specialized areas and specialized fields that everybody can participate in as well. I've got teams of people who work in security operations. I've got teams of people who work on incident response. I got people working on configuration management and network administration and so forth. The problem is, it's so easy. You're all busy. Everybody's busy. I've got 10 hours of work to do. I've got 8 hours to do it in. I've got to get this out. I've got management pressure. I've got leadership pressure on me. But what you have to understand is that you have to fall back on that education and that training. Do I know how to properly patch a machine? Do I know how to properly make sure it's set up and installed? Do you want to even know how many times we've caught, I do daily testing on all of our equipment across the department in different capacities. And, when you find somebody who installed a server and didn't delete the default credentials, when you find somebody who installed a new server and didn't set the parameters on it correctly, when I see somebody who has patches that are, 2 years out of date because, it's too inconvenient to interrupt the workflow process for the day. All of these things, and everybody who touched those machines is aware of those activities, is aware of the security stance of that, and really has a responsibility because it's not just one person. If I succeed in my job, but we'll pick on Dr. Emma in front of her here since she's here. If she fails in a spot, it doesn't really matter. We both failed in terms of our security stance. I'm not saying that you would. But what I'm really saying is that everybody has, a joint responsibility for this. One that's really undervalued and underrepresented, I think, in a lot of cases, is security documentation. One of the areas that, working with the FedRAMP and the security authorization process for cloud computing for the federal government, what you see is security documentation is often seen as kind of this burden, this excessive, focus on paperwork rather than security. But what we found working on the program is that basically if you can't describe it on a piece of paper, you aren't doing it. I don't really care how many times you say you have a really good security program, and I can assure you before FedRAMP started, every vendor who came into our office said, we do security. It was like, well, what part of security do you do? We had many conversations as, well, they did one thing really well, but they did 99 things that weren't so well. So, this security documentation piece, while it seems like it's overrated, perhaps it is over-audited. I would say if you can't really document what you're doing, you really probably aren't doing it. Again, where's that failure in process and people? It's because, well, there is no process that they're following. It only lasted as long as the last person in that position. And that education and that training that you get in an organization really helps move that needle forward to saying, it's like, look, not only should you look at and learn how to implement a configuration management process, but you also have to follow it. You also can help document it. You can also help, raise the stakes in terms of how well it's implemented and so forth. So I think there's these opportunities for everybody to really participate in the process, and I hope everybody, really has, takes that opportunity to learn those best practices, bring them to the organizations that they're going to, and really helping, that bigger picture, that broader picture of how security really makes it. Because again, you're not going to really be able to prevent every attack from every adversary that's out there. But what you can do is you can mitigate that attack, you can lessen the impact of that attack, and you can really be ready to detect it. We have incident response teams. You have skill sets for, testing systems and determining, an organization and how good you are. But you also have the same skill sets for detecting somebody else attacking you. You also have the same skill sets for recovering from an attack. And I think, when you look at the skill sets that are being developed in people today, your ability to capture those best practices and mature them. Another aspect of this is, what are the peer groups that you're making, and what are the relationships that you're making in your organizations and within your programs to really share that. I went to B-Sides over the weekend. I was telling somebody, what do? We run into people working in security operations centers at NIH. I bumped into, people that I work with in some of the vendor organizations to see how security is working in different kind of environments. As I said, I saw some other speakers in the last couple weeks that have been really excellent in maturing that, but it's also an opportunity to kind of share those experiences and share those war stories with your peers. So hopefully everybody can enjoy their programs while they're here and take those back to their new organizations and move them forward and feel that, everything, even if it seems small, is really important for the big picture to make sure that we are capable and resilient organizations. Thanks.
Thank you, Emery. Those are very important words. Specifically to me, I teach the human aspects in cybersecurity course, and he just taught that course to you. But all of the things that he's talking about are very important aspects that we bring forth in the course to let some of our cybersecurity students, especially the ones who are kind of technology focused, understand how important the human aspects are. So thank you for that. The panel discussion is going to be moderated by Chris Whittleton, who I mentioned earlier. He is our Vice President of Business Development Solutions and Partnerships. But I wanted to take one moment to let everyone know that during this transition, we're also welcoming some of the online folks who are joining us through WebEx. And we want to make sure that they are welcome to the presentation. I wanted to also let you know that this is being videotaped. So if anyone needs to use this for other purposes or know people who didn't have the chance to see it, it is being videotaped. So at this point, as I mentioned, I will turn over the podium to Chris, who will take care of the panel session. Thank you.
So the videotape part is the reason why I didn't walk down to center, because they didn't make up the top of my head, and I didn't want that. So you all didn't know that we were going to put you up here in front of heat lamps for about a half hour and then ask you a bunch of questions. So I've promised that I am not going to do any jokes about fishing or hunting or all of the super cybersecurity stuff today. We are very, very pleased. I work with all of our partnerships, and UMUC, we've been around a long history of serving students all the way back to serving students coming back from World War II. What we've always done is aligned with the corporate and employer community. And that's what these partnerships are all about, is making sure that our programs really meet that, as well as that we can serve these organizations to develop their current talent and make sure that they've got access to our students as they come out. So it truly is a full circle partnership. Joining us today, we have Richard Smith, who's the Director of Information Security with Freddie Mac. You want to raise your hand so everybody knows where you are. Steve Gantz, who's the Chief Security and Privacy Officer with Cognosante. He said they made it up, so there's got to be a jingle in there somewhere for their commercials. So, Devin Bryan, who is the CISO for ADP. Bianca McNair, who is the strategist with the National Cryptological School's College of Cyber with NSA. Chip Willard, who is the Senior Technical Leader with the NSA for the Threat Operations Center. Bill Morgan, who is the Chief Information Security Officer with USAID. Clifford Wilkie, who is the Chief Technologist with Hewlett-Packard. And Nick Oldham, who is counsel with King & Spalding, who represents a number of firms that work in the cybersecurity space. So we welcome you all today. As they mentioned, just a couple housekeeping things before we get started. There's actually over 300 people online listening right now. We will be taking some questions as a Q&A after we're done, and we're actually going to be taking some of the questions from that group online as well. So we'll jump right into it. We did prepare the group a little bit so that there's not any hardball questions being thrown at them. But because we have so many panel members, I'm going to direct it specifically to a couple of you as far as key questions, and then if somebody has something they want to add, because there's a couple questions to get to several of you. So first question, and I'm going to direct this to Richard, Steve, Devin, and Chip. Destructive attacks on critical systems are on the rise. Cyber criminals are threatening our very way of life and national security by targeting medical records, financial information, and critical infrastructure. What is your organization doing to make improvements in mitigating the risk of hacktivism and malicious or criminal cyber attacks? Richard?
So Freddie Mac is a unique environment. We have both tangible assets as well as a large amount of PPI, personal privacy information, that we hold. The amount of assets that we protect is about 1.9 trillion, and that is basically part of the large mortgage market. With that, we have to be very agile in our approach in protecting those resources, but what we try to do is we try to follow 4 simple principles within information security. First, we try to hire the best. That can be through a variety of different means. We allow, work from home flexibility. We allow, we have very, very good compensation packages, obviously, as a financial services firm would. We offer training for our employees, do a number of things around hiring the best talent out there in cybersecurity. The second thing we do is we train like we fight. So we train not only our cybersecurity professionals, but also the professionals that actually work at the company. So we do a lot of simulated phishing attacks. And some of those are very successful, some are not so successful, which is a good thing for us. The third thing we do is we protect the corporate jewels, quote unquote. What that means is we take a risk-managed approach to how we protect things. We try to look at all our key critical assets. We do a lot of things. We encrypt them, encrypt in state, we encrypt in transit, and we often test those at a very, very frequent basis, those critical assets. And then fourth, we bake security in. So we have, we have a very, very robust security architecture team that, builds requirements up front into all our application deployments. And that essentially, those 4 things we try to do. It's in our strategy, and I think we do it pretty well.
Okay. Steve?
Sure. So I work for a company called Cognosante. So we're a health IT consulting firm. We work mostly with state and federal government agencies. So pretty much all the data we work with is sensitive, right? It's not all health records, but there is health information in there. There's also just personal information about consumers or doctors or whoever it might be, depending on what we're doing. And so there's a very popular sort of buzz phrase out there. It's no longer a matter of if you're going to get hacked, it's when. I'm not sure I completely accept that, but it seems to be the conventional wisdom at the moment. So, there's always more you can do from a perimeter security, from a keeping the bad guys out, or even from keeping your own people from doing things they shouldn't be doing. But we've really shifted the focus because the data is the important part for us, right? We're people, we execute processes using sensitive data. So the data is really what matters the most, right? We're not, with a couple of small exceptions, we're not inventing new software and things like that. So we're just trying to do it better and make better sense of the data. So we've really shifted our focus to protecting the data. Internally, that might mean applying digital rights management technology to the data. So if the data gets out, if a document gets out, whether because somebody leaked it or because somebody didn't do something they were supposed to do, or even if we get an outside attack, the theory is you can't do anything with the document if you don't have the rights to it. You won't be able to open it. Encryption's at the heart of that, of course. That seems to be the way everybody's protecting their data, and we certainly do the same there. Helps a lot with the regulatory side of things, but also just shifts that focus. The other thing is the people, right? I am a big technologist. I'm maybe not quite as big a geek as some of the other speakers, but like to consider myself very technical. There's always more that we can be doing there, but most of our problems we can't solve with technology because at the end of the day, our work requires people to have access to lots and lots of data that should only be used in a certain way. And nobody really wants to run a police state in their own organization. We don't want to do such tight monitoring that nobody wants to work for us. That would be no help at all. But there has to be a balance struck there between keeping control over what people do in their day-to-day work, what they're allowed to do, who they're allowed to communicate with, whether they're allowed to get to Hotmail from their desktop, all those kinds of things. There are some good technologies out there. We experiment here at UMUC with virtual labs, right, to help online students do a lot of cool things with technology. That same technology exists in the workplace, right, virtual desktops. So you don't give somebody a laptop or desktop anymore. You just build it for them virtually from a remote server, and all of the data stays there, and they can't leak it. They can't copy it, they can't print it, they can't do anything with it, but they can do their job, right? So that's sort of a sweet spot that we find sort of meets a lot of those needs and helps us strike that balance point. So focus on the data and locking it down. Focus on what people are doing, and then the last piece I think everybody will probably refer to is training, both in terms of making sure people have the right skills to do their job when they come in, if their job is related to security, because I have quite a few certifications on my business card, and I think that could give the wrong impression to some people. Some certifications are easy to get and don't necessarily mean that somebody has the qualifications to configure your firewalls properly or to lock down your network and your devices the way that you want to. So trying to actually make sure that people have real competencies in what they say they've learned. And then, of course, complementing that with training. I'm responsible for all our security and privacy awareness training, so I'm the unpopular guy in September. We should probably switch to October when it's, Cybersecurity Awareness Month. But we do all our annual security and privacy training in September, and every year there's more. People think it will be less, right? Oh, I expect a lot when I join the company, but my annual refresher won't be as much. No, that's just not the way it's working anymore. So the only way I think we can really reinforce making sure people know what they're supposed to do and keep doing what they're supposed to do is to train them regularly in it and hope that you can rely on them to do the right thing.
It's so interesting. The more that we talk to organizations, what you mentioned about the right certs, that there's a whole list of acronyms that we can put behind our names, but what are the right certifications to what is hitting at that time and the fact that it changes daily? Really good. Devin, what would you add to that?
So thanks. So I guess the privilege of going third is that I can just say ditto, 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 right, and be done. But I don't think I'll get away with that. So my company, ADP, kind of cut our teeth in the payroll sector. We are, in fact, however, a full services human capital management company. So we take care of our clients' employees from the date of hire to the date of retire, with all providing services throughout the life cycle. We are, however, in the financial services sector, again, with payroll being our flagship offering. So we currently pay 1 in 6 in the United States. We currently service clients in over 100 countries, over 600,000 clients around the world. So on an annual basis, we're depositing $1.2 trillion into my former employers, the Internal Revenue Service. And those monies go into, of course, the financial economy of the United States. As goes the U.S. economy, goes the global economy. So the importance of what we do at ADP to protect the sensitive information, payroll and human capital management, making sure that data is protected in our systems, the importance of that, on not just the U.S. economy, but the global economy is certainly not lost on us. I was being a little bit, facetious when I said ditto, but certainly from making sure that we have the right people, we're making the right strategic investments in technology, and that we're maturing our processes around, adequate protections in light of the fact that you cannot protect everything. So how do you prioritize your protections around the crown jewels of your organization, right? So all those are key levers in terms of what we invest in, where do we place our devices, how do we monitor, how do we triage, and with us being global, the geographies that we do operate in, right? So for us, we have 5 critical pillars. Dynamic global threat intelligence, very critical to stay attuned and not just what's happening in our sector, but in the other sectors that we potentially could also see activities from. An active cyber defense, right? So it's one thing to be alerted after you've had an issue. It would be preferable that you get alerted and be able to take some actions in near real time during the course of an active intrusion. So active cyber defense is critical. A multi-layered protection architecture, traditionally that has been touted, or brands, variants of that has been touted as, defense in depth, right? We see it as a little bit different. So multi-layered protection architecture is critical for us. Signature-less malware detection. Right, so the age of relying on AV or signature-based, or even in some instances, some of the run-of-the-mill heuristics detection, some of those have their limitations. So for us, making sure that our endpoints are protected with less of a reliance on traditional signature-based technology, for us that's transformational. And the most important layer in our protections, and this was touched on by my learned colleagues, is the human firewall layer. We have 50,000 employees, associates at ADP, servicing our clients in 80 plus geographies that we operate in, making sure that our associates have the right training. And this isn't for us an annual exercise, right? Gone are the days where you have folks, do their 1 hour PowerPoint, click, 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 and you're done for that. Those days are gone. So making sure you have you're robusting that human firewall, because they are and will continue to be our first line of defense.
Okay, Chip.
Wow, that was a good answer. As an intelligence professional, normally when you're questioned under hot spotlight, your training tells you to clam up and not say anything. But so let me just say, I'm going to sort of build a little bit on what Paul had said in his keynote about NSA and what we're doing. So we regard cybersecurity as a team sport. So we partner very closely with DHS, FBI, DOE, industry, academia, research community, our own research. And so we are helping to help harden systems, because we live on those same networks. And we leverage our partnerships in the intelligence community to help us get ahead or get some insight into the emerging threats to these. And our knowledge of that threat helps to drive what we are doing on the cybersecurity side in information assurance. Paul mentioned that NSA has a mission of information assurance of national security systems. And that's pretty important. And as you said, how you define national security system, our definition, our current definition, is probably too narrow. I know the closer these things hit to my own home, the more national security systems bar is lowered. But one thing I should mention about that is that, back in the 90s, NSA adopted this idea of commercial first. In other words, back in the day, DoD and NSA, we used to build our own systems, and we could build them very secure, and they were very specialized to do very specialized missions in support of national security systems. But in the 90s, we went to this commercial first, and we started adopting commercial technologies and solutions. So it certainly behooves us to help to secure those very same technologies that the commercial world is creating. And so one thing on the national system security front is we have this program called Commercial Solutions for Classified. And basically, it's us setting up requirements to the commercial solution providers to meet certain requirements that will be suitable for securing and protecting national security systems. Now, what that does is it drives the commercial world into developing standards and technologies for security that can be applied across and become quite a good marketing pitch for their technologies. And so in that way, we're sort of driving the technology. As I said, we have the Intel side of our business at NSA. Gets way too much press. But we're also looking at the threat. We're trying to identify what the bad guys are doing, because this is a huge problem. And so everybody's talking about scale of the problem. It's a big scale problem. There's two ways to deal with scale. One is through automation, automated defensive capabilities and stuff, because quite frankly, humans can't often respond fast enough to these threats. But in order to do automation, you need to have standards for communicating with each other, for sharing information. Like I said, we partner very closely with DHS and FBI. We have to be speaking the same language. Our systems and sensors have to be able to communicate with each other. And so we're driving to develop standards so that we can communicate things like taxi and sticks, and these kind of things are very important. The other way to scale is to reduce the size of the problem. So the way you reduce the size of the problem is understanding what is it that the threat is out there and what they want. I think we have found, for instance, in the electric power industry, that utility system operators are very good at keeping the grid up when they know what the threat is. Like if they know there's a storm coming, they know there's going to be bad weather, they're very good at keeping the grid up. And by the way, we only have 3 grids in the US, 3 big grids. So it's quite a job, a task to keep that thing up. And it's been, 2003, we had one very large outage. And why did that outage occur? Why that big outage occurred was because First Energy lost situational awareness. They didn't know where the threat was. They didn't know they were the threat. But at any rate, so we try to provide threat information and understanding to the community so that they know exactly what they need to protect. Yeah. What is it that these guys are after? Because if I know what the threat is and I know what kind of things they're doing, then I can better configure my defenses to protect the most valuable assets that I have.
Excellent. And let me tie directly to that, because a lot of what I heard themes running through all that is particularly from an organizational standpoint, we need to make sure that everybody has access, but being able to protect them. So I'm going to direct this to Bianca, Bill, Nick, and Cliff. Thinking of that, all of the things that we have connectivity on, the Internet of Things is here. Cell phones, baby monitors, wireless medical devices, our vehicles, HVAC systems, and we keep hearing that as far as it's got to be everything from infrastructure to that connectivity. It's all connected to the internet with increasing risk of cyber attacks. What are the implications to the current state of cybersecurity as it relates to the Internet of Things? Bianca, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I took a couple of notes just so I wouldn't forget some points that I wanted to make. But from my perspective, I'm going to approach it a little bit more unconventionally. The way that I explain it to family members, for instance, because when you talk the national level, they're more interested in what hits home.
Right.
So I start from what do you care about? So from the perspective, the implication perspective of the average citizen, you have identity theft. So they care about, am I going to be able to purchase a home? Am I going to be able to purchase a car? Can I get a credit card? Then you have PHI threat or PII threat. So that's kind of loss of your personal information, whether that's for privacy or whatever stake that is. You get more into the business side, you think intellectual property theft. So I'm kind of going down, greater stakes type things. And then the fourth is what I call way of life theft, right? And that's more on the nation side. So if you think about 9/11, so what happened was, I always say that it was successful in that it changed our whole way of life, right? So if you think about the way that you used to be able to go to the airports and you could meet people near the gate. You could drop people off last minute. You didn't have an hour and a half wait and things of that nature. So I think that from those implications, the stakes are very high. And then once you get the implications of the workforce. So I think that the most important thing that I point to is kind of secure programming, secure development, which is something that we've had to go back and bolt on for some of our more critical systems. You think about the longer life, industrial control or SCADA systems that have 50, 60 year shelf life. that were some of them last updated when security wasn't really a thought or as much of a thought. Availability was the main concern. And so from that perspective, it really is I know the numbers say that we're 300,000, $1 million behind when it comes to certain skill sets. And I don't know that it's necessarily, I don't necessarily buy into the numbers per se. I think we have the people, but that they're not being trained adequately. And if you think about me from my own educational experience, it was more theoretical than operational, and we're not really teaching the operational side. I think we're getting a little better. Some of the programs that we're helping institute in partnership with the Centers of Academic Excellence, excuse me. So really getting into this is your risk space and programming people to be able to make the trade-offs. So when you think about, we all know if we had all the money in the world, what we would do, but that's just not the case. And it's really hard, and that's confounded by the fact of knowing where your threats are or where you believe them to be, or they could be anywhere. You could be held at risk at any given moment, and if you know where your threats are, normally that means someone else does too, so they will target the weakest link.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a challenge, but.
I like that, really emphasizing what each individual care about, because you're talking about on such full, broad levels, particularly from an organizational standpoint. Bill, your thoughts on that? Current state of cybersecurity as it relates to those people?
So the Internet of Things, I think you said cars, trains, buses, mobile phones, your refrigerator, and everything else. The thing that comes to mind to me most quickly, I'm going to use the word most quickly, is my drive here. I use my GPS in my car. And then I think about my car as well. Over the past 20 years, I bought a particular car. My son says that I'm boring because it's always the same car. But I like the car. I like what it does. And I've watched it evolve over time. Over time, it's gone from just being a car that gets you from point A to point B to being a place where I can actually sit in the car and conduct business. I could do everything from make a telephone call to actually read my email messages, to send text messages, to edit a document inside of my car. Now, there was one feature with this particular car that I did not have in my last car. That was the email feature. So I started to troll around the internet and figured out that there was a company that actually did that kind of work. However, this particular company seemed a little bit shady to me. They had a internet address that looked okay. They had a website that looked okay. But once I dug into it, I said, well, Bill, dig into it a little bit deeper. So I called these folks. It was a California number. However, the folks were actually in Poland. They weren't located here. And I was a little bit more curious. So I asked a few more questions. I said, okay, how does this work? Give me some detail around how this thing works. The way that it works is that they send me a cable. I forgot what you call those things. It plugs into the computer module inside the car. They send me a cable. I then hook it into a PC. Then these people remote into my car.
Wow.
Okay? So they would remote in my car. Then they would upload software to give me the option that my dealer didn't give me or that I didn't pay for.
They're very helpful.
Yeah, that's very helpful of them, absolutely. Wow.
Suffice it to say, I didn't take it on. Just yesterday, I read a news article whereas the Department of Homeland Security gave a grant, I believe, to the University of New York, and it's now starting to look at cybersecurity as it relates to automobiles. The genesis of this story, the whole moral of that story is that we are now involved in a world where it's actually an Internet of Things. Everything is on the internet, from our cars to our homes. The programmable thermostats, the fact that the utility company can monitor your usage of power. They can even cut back on your usage of power from afar. What else can they do? What else can they see in your house? Does it invade your privacy? The fact that the gas company can now look at what's going on in your home. I was on the elevator on my way to work. One of the folks that work for me, I've always been curious for the past 3 months. She's walking with an iPad and earphones in her ear, and she's constantly attached to this thing. I finally asked her what she was doing. She was monitoring her baby.
Ah,
She was at work monitoring her baby. But who else could also be monitoring her baby and what's going on in her home when she's not there? So the implications are vast. We need to do a lot more of what everyone has already said here. Everyone needs to be trained. And I think it needs to begin not just at the college level. We need to start training kids differently now, even in elementary school, teach kids what phishing is at a very, very early age. I've received phishing emails very, very recently which appear to be authentic from a bank that I deal with their logo. I trace back the address. The address looks like my bank, but I know it's not my bank.
yeah, yeah.
Education, in my view, is the most critical way that anyone today can have all the information that they need to make logical and reasonable decisions around cybersecurity. Again, it's not just something that it's needed at the college level. It needs to start at the grassroots, starting from childhood now, from early childhood.
As a parent of a 14-year-old who loves to go online and play games with his buddies, absolutely. He's already had several incidents, probably many more that we don't even realize as parents, that of people phishing him, trolling for whatever connections that they can as well. So,
The insider threat.
yeah, and that insider threat, absolutely. Although I make sure that he will be headed towards UMUC in one of our programs. His sister, who is a straight A student who doesn't like computers, is like, wait a minute, let me get this straight. He's going to be making like 10 times more money, and it's just because he likes playing video games? Come on. Nick, how would you respond to that around the Internet of Things, the implications there?
Sure. So most of the panel members here, from hearing their background, are very much technologists. I'm on the legal side, so I'm a lawyer with a technology problem. And the Internet of Things scares me quite a bit. And I think it was Chip who mentioned the 3 electrical grids, but we're kind of merging to one grid for the Internet of Things. And it jumps out at me, a theme from all of the discussions and all of these answers so far has been the human component. And I focus heavily on the people and processes side of this problem. And when it comes to the Internet of Things, that's the piece that I think is the most, that's going to have the biggest impact. So what I see is a lot more focus on awareness and accountability. And what I mean by awareness is we're all just pieces of this single grid. And it's the training, it's the education to understand how we fit into the problem, and so we know how to be able to protect ourselves, but also everybody else that we're now connected to. And the second is accountability, and I think, again, it was Chip who used the team sport, and I'm sorry, Chip, to steal all of your good ideas. But the idea that cybersecurity is a team sport, and it's very important with the Internet of Things. If it's a football team, your quarterback may not have to be trained like a defensive lineman, but being able to know what they're going to do and what their plays are is very important. And as we are merging onto this one grid, having accountability, folks who know what other people are doing, but have accountability for their own role, I think is critical. And phishing has been the example that has been used so far, understanding what the implications are if you're the one piece that fails into that system.
Absolutely. Nick, finish this out with us. Cliff, sorry.
Yeah, I think back on my very first Internet of Things device. It was my 6-pound cell phone I carried around about 15 years ago. And all it had on it was my phone numbers. I compare that to where we are today, and I have a device that I can do financial transactions on. I can communicate anywhere in the world on. It has tons and tons of information on. And it kind of gets back to that analogy of more information, more value, more risk to the bad people out there. And I think we need to be more diligent in this area. I fully agree with what Bill said, is that we do need to have better training in this area, and not just for the technologists, but for the general populace. I think there needs to be more public service announcements talking about this type of stuff, because it is very, very strategic to the overall dimensions. I think also there's a very, very delicate balance between privacy and security. I think we need to be very, very much aware of, not just today, but moving forward. And I think the implications, when you look in the forward, and I saw on TV the driverless cars getting further and further down the line of becoming reality, And think of what happened if somebody decides to play some silly game or hack into that driverless car, what the potential impact and what the loss of life might be. Or what the loss of life might be if someone decided to go in the water plant and change the chlorine settings or some things like that that are really near and dear. And that's something that we teach our students here at UMUC, is to be aware of those things that are actually out there in our day-to-day life and apply it to what they're looking at in the area of cyber, because really the dimension between cyber and reality, I think, is now melded into one of collaboration, and we need to be very much aware and take more of a proactive stance, and having really proactive cyber defense, even at the small device level, at the small sensor level, that I think is going to be a future area of need, because as you get more and more things in this Internet of Things, they'll be down to the sensor, down to the very, very low level things that need to have that same level of security as some of our major lead systems in our enterprise have today. So I think that's a challenge that we're looking for students to have in the years to come of how we address these.
How do we really build that into our programs? Makes sense. Please do.
Back on that, the mention of the Google driverless car from a practical perspective, right? So I know with wearables, right, Glass, Google Glass, right, triggered a number of updates to corporate security policies that says, you cannot have cameras in this part of the building, right? But, there's watch as well, right? So, but pretty soon, Google Glass right now, that sticks out. You can tell whether or not somebody's wearing glass, right? So they're recording everything they're seeing, the day and age when glass looks no different than these specs I'm wearing right now, that's not that very far away, right? And how are we going to adjust? You work in a SCIF or elsewhere, accounting and addressing, those kinds of challenges as IoT become more pervasive, life impacting, right? We've seen at DEF CON that, the insulin pump was remotely controlled, hacked, compromised, right? And that's also played out on, Homeland. I'm not sure if there are any Homeland fans in here, but we also saw that there. Similarly, there's a couple of interesting, my wife who's a privacy analyst, her and I were trading notes because the CNN was broadcasting about drone wars, right? Where now drones are increasingly being programmable and actually competing and invading the airspace of major airlines, right? So imagine, that kind of technology now in the hands of folks who want to do damage, right, to a airliner with, 400 or 500 people on board, right? There's actually also a YouTube video where a drone was programmed with a 9mm, pistol, be firing, live rounds, right? Similarly, there was a sniper rifle, right, that, was also remotely programmable because it was, internet accessible, right? Yeah. So, the reality of IoTs and what it means, not just in our personal lives, corporately, if you're practicing CISO and you aren't already updating your existing security plan for, to account for what's coming with IoT, then you might want to take another look at that.
Yeah. No, you mentioned those organizational policies. Most of the major threat attacks have come from inside in most recent years. Let's talk about that a little bit. What kind of policies are your organizations putting in place to prevent against those insider threats? You want to start down here?
Yeah, I think now you're looking at security from a different perspective. And I think looking back early in my career, security was kind of an afterthought that came in at the end. Now security is being put in from the very beginning. It's one of the attributes you include and have in there. It's having more proactive security than you had in the past across the entire enterprise, not just being reactive from a security perspective. I think having at all levels, the application layer, et cetera, having more security at that level, looking at what's happening, having more sensors in place to see what's happening, looking at your network, looking at the overall holistic perspective of your organization to be sure that it is secured any place, any point down the timeline. Somebody's already mentioned the defense in depth perspective, but I think that's really critical to have today and in the future moving forward, and having that multi-level protection that's out there, because you could have insider threats, you could have external threats, or it could be a mixture of both. So I think we need to be prepared for what we don't know.
What other policies are being put in place for insider? Anyone?
I'll go. I think for employees, I'll start with those employees. When I first read your question, you remember he told us He told you we got the questions in advance, so I was thinking on this one for a couple days. I'm not sure I agree with the premise, although I think the definition of insider has to be broadened a little bit. If you think of the really high-profile hacks like Home Depot, OPM, right? Those were, the way in was all, in those cases, was traced to a third-party company that had privileged access to the actual target, right? OPM, it was one of their background clearance contractors. Home Depot, it was an HVAC contractor, right? So if the company's defenses are bolstered, right, add security at all those layers, find another way in, right? No matter what it happens to be. And so there's an assumption, whether it's fair or not, that the partners you do business with might not have as good security as you do. Contractually, for years, I'll wade into Nick's area while disclaiming the fact that I am in no way a lawyer or even approximate one. The contractual standard for years, business associate agreements in HIPAA or other sorts of contractual agreements, is a subcontractor attests to having adequate controls. There's usually a clause in the contract that says the writer of the contract can go and inspect if they feel like it, but not that many organizations really do vet their vendors or their subcontractors. They instead ask them to sign a legal document that says, no, no, we do have this covered. We will apply similar protections to what you would do yourself, which sounds great until somebody uses the fact that that's not actually true to break into your organization. So from a technical standpoint, I think that's the problem now, is that you've got lots of organizations more aware of how they need to bolster their security, but they forget that anyone they do business with who they give access to their network is potentially a way in. From the actual employee standpoint, where we've ended, where folks are dealing with sensitive information, if we just constrain what people can do. Unfortunately, in some cases, that makes it the job less entertaining, or feel like you're under a lot more controls, and people don't like to be under controls. But anybody who's worked in the defense sector is used to a clean desktop policy. Most DoD facilities, you can't even walk in with a cell phone. It used to be that you could leave your battery at the desk, but now, no. Just leave it in your car and don't bother bringing it into the building. The vast majority of people are going to do what they're supposed to do and are not the problem. So you come back to more of a philosophical question of, when I have employees, do I trust them by default until they do something wrong? Or do I have to distrust them by default? And in a large organization, it's almost impossible to not have some, I won't say bad actors, because they don't have to have malicious intent. They just have to do something wrong. It can be a complete accident. They can have the best intentions. They can just not be thinking when they click on that phishing email, right? Doesn't mean they're trying to bring down your organization, but the damage could be just the same no matter what. And so, unfortunately, as a security officer, I'm now in a situation much more than I was, say, 10 years ago, where I'm arguing with the business about where we tip the balance in terms of securing and adding security controls versus wanting people to feel trusted and feel like a valued member of the team, which I absolutely want my employees to be, right? We have the entire value of our company as a services firm is our collective employees. So you don't want to give people the wrong impression. But at the end of the day, you know, my boss, who's our CFO, jokes with me all the time that my only job is to make sure we don't have a data breach, right? I work in the health sector. That's all anybody cares about right now, right? That is the only thing that I need to do. And so the way to do that, if I'm going to try to be successful or at least mitigate my risk, is to put more significant constraints around any possibility that somebody can cause a problem for us, accidental or intentional. So that's, it's not my favorite answer, but that's the practical reality where I'm living right now.
Nick, he referenced you from that legal perspective.
Sure. So I'm seeing three emerging trends. One is, I know when I was at the Department of Justice, it took me about 2 years to figure out where to find all the policies that governed my behavior. And what I've seen is a trend in the last year where companies are realizing that in order to minimize the insider threat, they have to simplify and clarify their policies. And so what I've seen is almost a reverse trend of adding more stuff, actually communicating what's relevant to people. If it's spear phishing, if it's your admin and the big risks that you've identified as spear phishing, making sure they get adequate training, but don't overload them with things that may be irrelevant to them. So it's to simplify and clarify the policies. The second emerging trend that I see in my practice has been, I guess I'd call it the reduced temptation practice, which is identifying which employees actually need something and giving them only access to that. Most companies that I deal with, it's surprising that a person gets onboarded as a new employee and 3 years later, their job title has changed, their duties have changed, but they have the exact same access to the systems that they did on the first day. And so I see a lot of companies now taking a hard look at themselves and saying, how do we reduce temptation from employees? How do we make sure that these individuals only have the access that is necessary for their job, and we communicate that to them? And the third is something that Steve mentioned, was about third parties. I'm seeing companies now really elevating the decision-making process about security to a high enough level where they're building robust third-party risk management programs or insider threat programs where it's moved out of security or out of the IT department and elevated so everybody with a stake in the problem, HR, the business units, the legal counsel's office, the information technology department, and security, if it's separate, are all at the table figuring out the best way to protect against the insider threat for their organization.
Go ahead, Dave.
So, this could potentially be viewed as the utopian or the dystopian perspective on it, right? And I hate to use another movie analogy. Trust me, I do have a full-time job, in fact, more than one.
He watches a lot of movies.
But Minority Report, right? Minority Report, the precogs, right? The ladies that were in the pool, and they were predicting crime before it occurs, right? So as, the folks in charge with being the paid paranoid in our organizations, wouldn't it be cool if we could detect the signs, the symptoms that an employee was going to go rogue before they actually did, right? And I know it gets really controversial because you have to collect a boatload of information in order to get to that level of intelligence. Right. But at the same point in time, having a robust enough program to where, you strike the balance between invasion of privacy and all that good stuff, right? And being creepy, right? Just in order to profile what normal behavior is, for your employee population so that when behaviors fall outside the norm, you can potentially take action to mitigate loss, right? So, but it does get controversial.
We've probably got about enough time for one more question, and then we'll go to Q&A. So from the entire panel, one of the things that I've starred the most throughout is the training on the right things. And when we're thinking about the workforce, the cyber workforce that we need coming forward, what do you really feel like needs to be in that workforce? If the prospective students that are listening, all of our employer partners, what do we need to be building into the training of the cyber workforce moving forward? When we start back down with you, Richard, and just work our way down.
Sure. I think that we have to understand, first of all, where people are in their career, I think. We have a lot of young professionals. I started my career out in the Navy. I think we have to understand where the personnel that we're seeing and training are coming from. What generation are they part of? A lot of attention is spent on talking about the millennials and how they, how we are able to manage them and how effective they are at their particular job and to the workforce. And I think it's important that first of all you understand who your audience is. So, but also be able to steer them in the right direction in terms of the academic requirements that are needed for the position. Is it a position that is available that you might just need a certification for, or is it more of a higher learning type position that you need a more graduate level degree or a degree in order to take that position? So I think it's a variety of different methods you need for that to determine that.
Okay. Let's just keep everybody take a turn on that one.
Yeah,
It's
a big question, probably with a lot of answers. I think one of the benefits in the area, and certainly UMUC is certainly seeing the growth in the cybersecurity program, which, those degree programs only started, 5 years ago? But, the problem we had for a long time, like when I was in college in the 80s, some people take pride in being a geek and some people don't, but IT was not seen as a cool profession in any way. And I actually think TV has actually helped with that, even though it's a little bit ridiculous and not necessarily realistic. But it doesn't matter where you look. You can pick the top traditional liberal arts land-grant universities in the country, Harvard, Stanford, and on down. Computer science is the top major now, right? It's not just because it's a good job market, although that never hurts when people are going to school. But I think people understand, people who grow up with technology are interested in playing with stuff. Maybe not everybody wants to jailbreak their iPhone or root their Android, but I think people are used to playing around with technology to get it to do what they want it to do for them. And that doesn't go you don't have to go very far down that path before people are actually interested in programming concepts. There's all sorts, I live in Arlington County in Virginia. And they're already doing hour of code stuff in elementary school with second and third graders. You know, you're not teaching very many 8-year-olds Python, although Python is a great language to start kids on, but they are getting people interested in those sorts of, you know, wouldn't it be cool if you could just tell that iPad that you use in school exactly what you want it to do and have that show on the smart board in the room so you can share it with all your friends or bump them off or any of those kinds of things. They get very competitive about it right away. And that's what I love about the Cyber Padawan sort of success at UMUC and even the program is people didn't, you know, other than those of us who got like pen testing certifications a long time ago, nobody ever thinks about IT as a competitive sport, right? We said it was a team sport. But, you know, you talk about, and it's true for STEM education in general, the U.S., you know, needs some more attention there, right, on the global economy to make sure that we stay competitive. And I think one way to get people excited about that is to sort of change the way it's being delivered a little bit, that it's not all about, you know, bits and bytes and circuit boards and, I mean, people certainly have to be the engineers too. I'm not an engineer, can you tell? But, you know, using the technology and being able to just make, whether it's a drone, a robot, whatever the device is, work and do the way you want. I think people find it interesting, so that's a way to engage it, I think, at even the pre-higher education level. And I would like to see more of that. Somebody before mentioned, I think you mentioned software security, right? When I was coming up, I was briefly Java certified. I'm like the worst coder you could ever imagine, but I had to do it for a job. If you wanted to go and learn what are the best secure coding practices for Java, you couldn't find a course to teach it. It didn't exist. And this is like late 90s. This is not that long ago. And it's only been in the last maybe 10 years that people have actually started to teach secure coding practices, which seems ridiculous given how long people have been coding. But that's why we're still dealing with this bolt-on security problem, is that it's only recently people have said, yeah, we really do need to build this in. And so I think more emphasis on that and not building your whole tool set and then learning security, but learning security as part of your tool set. I think will help with, you know, several of the other issues that you brought up today as well in terms of getting people ready to attack them.
Okay. Devin?
Yeah, so briefly, I'll try to be really brief. You touched on a couple of things that hit a couple of nerves for me, right? So certainly the U.S. is ranked 27th out of 32 in the world from an OECD countries, first world countries, you know, from STEM perspective, right? A lot of that has to do with the fact that, and it's representative of what we have on the panel, right? We have a single female, right? You know, why is that, right? You know, why aren't we attracting more women into the field, right? Why is it that when we sell what we do, you know, it's typically male and it's typically all about, you know, the Python programming, not to pick on you, but, you know, it's like we've got to change that dynamic, right? CSI, you're exactly right. It's making it, you know, a child can't be what a child can't see. Right? And if if the typical model, the typical, you know, representation of our practice, it's, you know, it's a male, I mean, it is male dominated, but we've got to change that perspective significantly. So the training, you know, yes, certainly we need to expand it beyond just being, you know, hardcore techie focused. That's very necessary, but there are several domains, you know, several areas of practice within cyber that doesn't require the hardcore reverse engineer and malware on the wires, right? 48% of the U.S. workforce are females, but only 10% females in the cybersecurity space. You know, those percentages are dismal. Similarly, African Americans and Latinos, you know, severely underrepresented in this space as well. So we've got to do more to attract and expand, you know, the folks coming into the field to help us address some of the staffing shortfalls that was mentioned previously, and certainly, you know, open up the door so folks don't think that everybody has to reverse engineer malware in order to be a seasoned practitioner. That's just, you know, that's just false.
No, that's great. And we've actually got some questions coming in from online, but Bianca, since he referenced you and you and I had this conversation beforehand, why don't you finish us out on those skills, and then the rest of the group I'll take to the next question coming from one of our students. So.
All right, so in my mentoring life, a lot of what I advise people, I still consider myself to be pretty young in my career, but one of the things that I always focus on is if you want to get your foot in the door, is that you have to know how to program, and probably program securely. I know how to program, I hate it. You know, it's never been anything I wanted to do, and fortunately, it wasn't something that I had to do. But pretty much every aspect of technology involves some level of programming. So that's the advice that I give the high school graduates and things. Just focus on that and use that to pivot if you're interested in something else. Probably the most important advice that I give people is to focus on more than one facet of your career. The one facet, I kind of have three. So I've had the IA, the CND, I've done defensive cyber operations. So that's all, techie stuff. But I've also, I'm acquisition certified, have been for years and years. And also, now that I'm with the College of Cyber, I've taken on kind of a third facet of my career. So when people tell you be flexible, it's not, I used to reverse engineer, now I do forensics. I used to program, now I'm doing malware analysis. So it's not necessarily that. It's more of, if you want to be successful at the technical level, just kind of learn how the money flows in your organization. Doesn't mean you have to touch it. Go talk to them. That'll help either get your project funded, help you on your sales pitch. You'll know what their thresholds are, but that makes you a little more successful, I think, overall. So that's kind of how I focus them and tell them to remain a little flexible. And it helps you more well-rounded and able to make decisions, even if you want to stay. I know some people want to stay in the weeds. Some people don't ever want to make management level. They don't ever want to not be hands on keyboard, and I respect that. So it's just what helps you be a little more successful at the level that you want to go to.
It's really good guidance. And actually, this question comes from a student, so Chip, we'll start with you on this. Says, I will do this. I am a veteran transitioning into a new career field. I've joined the Army at the age of 17 and separated at the age of 26. Now I'm 28, 2 classes away from graduating with my degree in computer networks and security. However, I do not have a clearance, which makes it difficult to get a job. What advice do you have for someone like me? And this is from Scott Green, who's a UMUC student.
Well, I don't necessarily think you need to have a clearance to work in this business. Cybersecurity business is, unfortunately, is a growing business. I have these rules of cybersecurity, and I should mention them real quick. Rule number 1 is they're going to get in. No matter, we have these things called advanced persistent threats, and the bad thing about them is that they're so darn persistent. If they got something, if there's something you've got that they want, they're going to get in. Rule number 2, very quickly, is you can't change rule number 1. We seem to think we can, though. Rule number 3 is they're already in. At least you should assume so. And the reason you should assume this is because, like I said, they're going to get in. And so the best way to protect yourselves in cybersecurity is to perhaps be resilient and attack within or defend within your networks. And rule number 4 is attacks will continue. So no matter how secure you think your network is, at the end of the day, tomorrow is a new day to battle again. It's just going to keep coming. Rule number 5 is it's going to get worse. and the problem is the better we get at defense, the better they get at attacking, right? Which actually goes to rule number 6, which is defenders will contribute to the situation getting worse. A lot of things we do actually make things worse for ourselves. And if we don't consider how the things we're doing make it worse for ourselves, then we're not going to be able to get ahead of the game. Now, the last rule, which actually speaks to the last question, which is the only security that we've actually achieved in cybersecurity is job security. And I should say, and that speaks to the question the person asking, is I don't know if we can define what a cybersecurity professional is really. I mean, we sort of use our own perspective of what that means. A lot of people who have worked in forensics and stuff like that have a certain thought about what cybersecurity, network security, system admin, these kind of things. It's many things. And it's different for each sector you're working in, right? And so government we have some of our own issues, but if you're working in the medical field or the financial sectors, you have different issues that you need to concern yourself with. So there's lots of opportunities. In fact, I would say we need to teach cybersecurity as a part of every curriculum out there, every part of the curriculum. And like what's been said before, is we need to start in grade school, learning what cybersecurity is. So I don't think we need necessarily need a clearance necessary to work in this business. There's plenty of work to be done. Even the government, where we're doing classified work, so much of the work and the research and the innovation that's occurring in cybersecurity comes from stuff that's being done outside of these. We can all learn and we can all make use of that stuff. I don't think there's, clearance is nice if you want to get into our business, get into our building, but it's certainly not a requirement for getting into cybersecurity business.
That's a good point. Actually, one of the defense contractors I'm meeting with out in Montgomery County, and I was referencing the fact that I was from a blue-collar background on the Eastern Shore, and he said, do you have any electricians that want to add something to their world? Because I need that. We've got more threats against the physical plant with electricians and HVAC, and if you can get those to add cybersecurity to the background, the skill set that they already have, there's a need for that within the space. So it really is everywhere. Anybody else want to touch on that question around the clearances?
Yeah, I think that clearance is only really effective, really necessary when you're in the government space of needing it for that. I think that if the individual wants to have a career in that area and that's one of his goals, he might maybe look at the step procedure he can go through to get there, maybe working for someone in the commercial sector, getting some experience there, working for another company that maybe has some federal contracts to get somebody to sponsor him to get a clearance. So I think there's a pathway to get there that most organizations have, and I think he can achieve his goals.
Okay. Let's turn to the audience because I'm just watching the time. I want to take any questions. Anybody want to stand up? I don't know that we have microphones, but if you want to say it out loud, and then I'll try to repeat it for those that are listening online.
Where I work, I noticed that there are employees that are terminated. However, they still remember the Wi-Fi passwords, or they still remember a lot of the access points. For instance, I could just, if I got terminated today, I know that the password hasn't been changed for such a long time that I could go drive by the building with my laptop and still get into the building. Okay, so there are a lot of times I notice that you're talking about the training aspects, that they're given every year as a requirement, but I don't see much in terms of listening to the people who are working with the information saying, you have a hole, or something of that sort. Can you talk to that?
Go ahead, Bianca.
So my take on it has always been that the people who know mostly what your holes are the system administrators, the net administrators, people who are actually on the system every day. So if you actually go talk to them, I'm pretty sure, and just ask them what their top 3 is, if they wanted to do something bad, they probably would inundate you with information, just to be honest with you. I don't know that I think it's more of a training and education piece. So it is the people who make the funding decisions. If you're not able to articulate to them what the actual risk is in a method that they would understand, then that becomes a challenge. So really educating them, the acquisition people and some of the others who aren't necessarily involved on the technology side and who are decision makers on what the threat space is, what the impacts are if you do or don't do something, and also bringing them actionable and maybe even phased approaches on how to get there. And that gets more to, like I said, the education piece and not so much the training piece.
Anybody else want to take that? What are you doing to educate and train that current workforce?
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead,
think
Richard.
it's so important. He touched on a topic that I'm sort of passionate about. In the government, we have this idea of information system security officers, and what we've done at Freddie Mac, we've done something similar. We have security champions, and those are folks like yourself that are interested, and they're in each of the business lines. So we've identified, probably 100 of them, and what they do is, every month we meet and we discuss different topics of interest that we can take that information back from them. So what kind of vulnerabilities are they seeing? We call them, self-reporting essentially, but these are things like, Wi-Fi passwords, or someone else, someone's maybe using a rogue Wi-Fi device at their desk that shouldn't be, or someone's maybe using a USB drive that is not approved, things of that nature. And I think that feedback loop is so important, because within security, we tend to know, as security professionals, sometimes I think we feel like we know more than other folks. Yeah. But we should be listening as much as we're telling. And I think that's an important aspect of how you're going to see security evolve.
That's good. Appreciate your question. Let's do one more question from the audience, and then go ahead, Yvonne. Do you have a mic for this gentleman here in a Hawaiian shirt?
All right. Yeah, my name is Corey Freeman. I'm a computer networking and security student out here at UMUC, and I have kind of a nerdy question for you. So, you know, with very funny. So, with public records, especially health records, becoming a big issue in cybersecurity today, in your opinion, do you think having like a main centralized record server would be easier to defend, or do you think it would be more vulnerable to a single point of failure?
Who wants to jump on that?
Anybody?
I hear yes and yes. Easy answer.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Richard.
I have a question for you.
Yes, go for it.
Is the server connected to the internet?
Yes, it is. It's since it's a centralized server, and there's offices around
Okay.
around the country.
So obviously your highest security is you disconnect it, right? But aside from that, I mean, you just need to make sure that you encrypt the data, you know, both in transit and both the data at rest. And you monitor, you know, least privilege, obviously, for users that are utilizing that, you know, accessing that database. And you need to make sure that your users are trustworthy and that you're properly identifying who they are and who is accessing it. So those are the things I would do.
Anybody else want to jump in on that?
Well, I guess there are certainly pros and cons, right, to a centralized, repository of, sensitive information versus a decentralized, model, right? I think, as Richard said, certainly, prioritizing and layering your protections around the repository, whether it's, centralized or decentralized, is going to be pivotal to mission success. One could argue that by you centralizing and just paint a big target on it, right? Say, hit me here, and you get everything, right? But a lot will depend on the business exigencies surrounding whatever organization you're supporting. I mean, if they're, like in our case, a multinational having a repository of sensitive information in one geography versus another, right? When you start looking at the impact on business processes, because at the end of the day, we're not in the business of security for the sake of security. We're in the business of security to support our business strategies, right? So, it depends. It depends. And one can argue, quite frankly, either way on it, right? But, at a minimum, you'd have to go through, the basic hygiene stuff that Richard just touched on, access controls, encryption, layered defenses, irrespective of whether it's centralized or decentralized, right?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I know firsthand, based upon my experience working in the financial sector, that you actually have 3 centralized databases today for financial records for your FICO scores, Experian, TransUnion, and the 3 credit scores. And I know one of those organizations very close because I actually monitored them, and they did have super high security with regard to encrypting the data, how it's used, how it's monitored, how it's out. So there is a model for that success out there today, and could it be transitioned to other areas? And I think it would be a very good thing to have someone take a look at.
Chip.
So I just wanted to speak to a bigger issue which you have sort of hinted to, which is this tension that exists between creating efficiency and functionality versus security, right? So, most of the advances in technology today are being driven by our desire for functionality and efficiency. So your mobile phone has all these wonderful features that are very neat. The car, the Internet of Things, right? All of this is driven by efficiency. The problem is that the more functionality you build into any system, that's a functionality that can be exploited by a bad guy. So any control or any efficiencies or capabilities that you have that you build into a technology can be exploited and leveraged by a bad guy. So one of the things we need to do, especially the folks that are in the development world, as they develop technologies, ought to think about, do I really need this functionality? There was a demonstration of a hacked car, a hacking of a car, and they did it from the back seat, and they went in and connected to the car's backbone, network, which was connected to everything. And they were able to reduce the fuel gauge to read that there was no fuel in the car. But you sort of have to ask yourself, why would you ever do something like that? Why would you have that function in there? What would that serve? And so we need to think about this idea of least privilege, right? And also distrust by default, to say, let's think hard about making ourselves more resilient to attack by reducing the functionality that we don't need in the technology as we develop this. And a lot of that development work needs to be driven by the folks who are working in the cybersecurity community. So that's all.
So we're going to finish with one question. And Bill, I'm thinking of you from a standpoint of after watching the presidential debates and the people that said, "Hey, I didn't get to talk enough." So we're going to end with you. Now we don't have 17 up here, but I think you'd be a good one to answer this question. What advice?
For the rest of the hour.
Yeah. What advice do you have for the next generation coming into the cybersecurity space?
My advice is clear and simple. Continuous education. Education. Unlike some of my colleagues, and I agree with probably about 98.95% of what you guys said, security folks really do need to understand a lot more than the other IT people. You won't get the respect of the system developer, of the architect, of the engineer if you don't understand their business. They will believe that you're just asking them to do security for security's sake. So you really need to understand, you don't have to be an expert in every single part of IT, but you need to be an expert, certainly in all the aspects of security, and you need to become more than familiarized with all the other parts of IT, programming, enterprise architecture, network engineering. You need to have experience in all of those pieces so that you can garner the respect. Also, the soft skills. You need more than the hard technical skills. You need the soft skills. As Bianca said, you need to really understand the people who control the purse strings. If you don't understand the people who are the budget folks and the folks that are acquisition people, you'll never get anything new or different in your environment. So to sum it all up, you have to know more than the people you're competing against. It is a competitive sport. It has become a competitive sport. Let me do it one more time. It is a competitive sport. There's a lot of competition out there. You have to know more than your colleagues do, and get to know people, work on the soft skills. Soft skills are extremely important because you are ultimately trying to convince people to do something that they really don't want to do.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm going to bring Luis up here to kind of close us out. I want to remind everybody as we finish, as you go out the doors, there's a whole reception area, a number of different tables, information, things like that. The panel will be available for you to talk to. Do recognize as soon as we end that they've been up here for like an hour and a half, so they might want a chance to hit the restrooms before you hit them, so let them get to that back part of the room. But Richard Smith is the Director of Information Security with Freddie Mac. Steve Gantz, Chief Security Privacy Officer with Cognosante. Devin Bryan, the CISO with ADP. Bianca McNair with NSA. Chip Willard with NSA. Bill Morgan from USAID. Clifford Wilkie is the Chief Technologist at Hewlett-Packard, and Nick Oldham. Let's thank our panel for their time.
Well, thank you again. This was great. It really, for me, and I think a lot of the UMUC folks that I work with, we are very conscious of keeping our curriculum up to date and making sure that we are teaching the right competencies in both the cybersecurity technology side and on the policy side. And for me, and I think my colleagues would agree, that a lot of the discussion that Emery and Paul and the panelists gave us really shows how wide-reaching the topics are when it comes to cybersecurity. So I really appreciate and thank them for that. Thanks. So in staying with our theme of linking academics, skills, and professional expertise, now we have some time for you to do some networking with some of the folks that are here, both the people from UMUC and our guest speakers. I'd like to actually thank a lot of the people who made all of this possible, not only the graduate school and the undergraduate school participants, but also the folks from marketing, student advising, student services, IT support, the events office, communications, and career services. And with a special thanks to a couple of people who really put forth a lot of effort, my dear friend, Jennifer Hull, who put the logistics together, and also a lot of gratitude to Renu Sharma and Yvonne Lawyer from the marketing department. So we hope that you continue your relationship with us. We offer premier programs for both teaching opportunities and learning opportunities in the areas of information assurance and cybersecurity. So again, thank you for coming, and please feel free to talk to anyone who's here who might have sparked your interest in the career in academics, or just chatting about CSI Cyber or something like that. So thank you again. I appreciate you coming.